So one of the things that I want to show you is the meta logging workspace. So if you really want your project to be easily searchable by a whole host of categories, you can inject a whole lot of metadata into any given file. So if I click on any file in a project here, I can see what metadata already exists. So let me just click on a sequence here. Okay, and then if I head on over to the metadata tab, I can see what kind of thing it is, what kind of label it is, what it's named, all the stuff that we see in the metadata area of the program window is here. And then we can also adjust things and add things as well. So if we needed to add notes here, add any kind of information that we want so we can search for that stuff. So if I add something like this, so if I add something like this, don't use. Okay, so now that is saved as a comment here. And I have comments selected on in metadata display. And I search for don't. Now I know that this thing, even though there's a ton of metadata here, it comes up with a don't use. That was lesson number 5. It gets flagged instantly. So if you happen to end up with a project that has an immense amount of material and media, this is very helpful. If you're working with something that's a lot smaller, just a few clips, maybe you don't have to do all of this work, but it is a good idea to get in the habit of doing this stuff. If you work as an assistant editor on a big project, you'll be doing a lot of meta logging. It is important to know that some of this metadata will not move over to other programs though. So if the idea here is that you're going to work inside Adobe Premiere and then eventually go out into DaVinci Resolve, only very limited metadata will move over with your project. Speaking of that, if that is your intention to go from Adobe Premiere to DaVinci Resolve or to Final Cut, or even Avid Pro Tools for your audio mix, you can do that pretty easily. If you go under File, then Export, you have some options for exporting your project, which I don't have a project selected right now, as a few different things. You have an OMF, which is I think the preferred way to go out for Pro Tools, and then you can also do a Final Cut Pro XML, which is the current best way to go for both DaVinci Resolve and Final Cut. Basically, any of these things are just a series of metadata analysis points. So even though just like what we talked about with the Premiere Pro project file, these metadata exports that you'd be exporting out here reference a clip. It says where this clip exists on your hard drive. It says when the clip should start, when the clip should end, and in what order do all of these clips go in on a timeline. It'll also include things like how resized is the image, is it moved, is the position moved around, are there dissolves, right? Like very basic NLE transitions and effects, but a whole lot of stuff is specifically Premiere or specifically these other programs, so some things won't transfer over. Everything that you create inside Premiere, like generated text or graphics or color mattes, color bars and tones, anything like that that you would create in Premiere will not be included with a metadata file like Final Cut Pro XML. It just doesn't exist anywhere other than inside the Premiere Pro project file. So something to keep in mind if you do plan on going out to a different program from here. Now, I just have a couple more things for you. If you want to synergize with these other programs, kind of like what we did with kind of like what we did with Adobe Audition, if we wanted to, say, take a clip and jump out into After Effects and work on it, maybe add some really cool text effects, we can just right-click any clip and then select Replace with After Effects Composition. And what's really cool is, I was working on something there. What's really cool is it will launch the program for you and load up all of the stuff that's necessary to work on that project. Another thing that I want to show you that's kind of under the hood here, if we go to Edit, we can find Keyboard Shortcuts. I've told you a bunch of keyboard shortcuts for Adobe Premiere as we've gone through the program over these last 7 lessons, but you can change all of those things. So if we go into keyboard shortcuts here, we can see the shortcuts laid out for us here. We can see, there's spacebar, which is the play stop toggle and works in almost every window there. We can also search for things that aren't natively hotkeys. So if we searched for synchronize, right? Synchronize is something that we would have to click 2 clips, right click, and go to synchronize. And if we're going to do that over and over again, we might want to assign that to a specific button on our keyboard. Now we can replace any of the things that already exist here, or we could use something like I generally use the number pad that has nothing assigned to it automatically. If you are working on a laptop or something, you might not have a number pad. That doesn't make sense for you. But if you want to click, drag, and drop that onto any number, now we see that the number 1 on our number pad is now synchronized. And you'll see right away that our keyboard layout preset has gone from Adobe Premiere Pro to custom. And you see that I have a few custom ones in here as well. But there are some other layouts that you might recognize here. So if you came from Final Cut Pro 7 and you're used to all of the hotkeys for Final Cut Pro 7, you can actually switch that over, and now all the hotkeys that were there in Final Cut 7 will now work for Premiere for you. There is no Final Cut Pro X because it's a little bit different in how it operates, but also Avid Media Composer 5. If you're coming from Premiere Pro CS6, the older version of Premiere, then a lot of the things are still the same here, but a couple of differences, and you can adjust those there. The big deal is that you can create your own and find what works for you, and maybe what works for you for given circumstances. So again, if you're just like organizing your footage and maybe syncing a whole lot of stuff, then something like this workspace that I created here might work for you, where you can jump panels, you can select all and synchronize all on the number pad without using your mouse too much. These things can save you a ton of time and make your life a lot easier. The issue with using these things generally is, though, if you're not on your computer, if you get really used to the hotkeys that you've created and you've moved all of this stuff that's normal, once you move on to a different computer, you start working for a firm and you're an editor, then none of your hotkeys are going to work and you're going to be much slower than you normally are. So there is a way to work around that, and I think, and I'll show you how to do that real quick. So if you set all of your keyboard shortcuts and you're happy with this stuff, you can click Save As and you can name it, and we'll just call it Sync and Org Number Pad here. And we're just going to overwrite it because we didn't do anything new to it. So that's saved, and anytime I come into Premiere, I can select that on. It's going to be automatically selected on until I switch to something else. But where does that save? So that saves in this very deep path within the program. So that's this PC documents Adobe Premiere Pro, whichever version you're on, and then your Windows profile, and then Win if you are on a Windows computer. If you're looking for this, and this is a little bit difficult for you to remember, it is for me too, if you do a search on your hard drive for a .kys file, that is the file type for Premiere Pro hotkeys. So I can put this as an attachment in an email to myself. And then if I go to another computer that doesn't happen to have my Premiere on it, I can't log into my account. I have to use like a default account or something. I can download this .kys file and then put it in this very specific folder. So again, on that other computer, you can search for .kys and find where that goes, and then just place it in that folder, and then you'll have it on the next time you boot up Adobe Premiere. Another thing that I want to show you, and it's a common issue, is if we go under Edit and then Preferences, you can find audio hardware. So if you happen to plug in headphones, or you adjust your audio hardware, you have multiple sources. Like right now I have a mixer that's plugged into my computer for a microphone, and then I also have my speaker and headphones here. We can select where our audio is coming out and where our audio is coming in. So if we're recording through that microphone, which we have, which we did for voiceover and stuff, that's right here, making sure that that is selected there. And then we can also make sure that our output is coming through the headphones. We could also send it back through the mixer that I have there. Also under Preferences, there is an autosave function, and you might have noticed this as you've been working, that autosave pops up every 15 minutes. I think that that's what it is by default. But if you're finding that your computer is crashing a whole lot and you want that autosave to happen a little bit more, you can adjust the time here. We could maybe set it to every 5 minutes. If you find that your program hardly ever crashes and it's just annoying to have the autosave window pop up, you can always turn that up to maybe 30 minutes or an hour. It is important that you have it selected on. You can turn it off entirely, but whenever you do that and then you have a crash, it's going to be really catastrophic. You can also adjust how many project versions there are. There will autosave. So maybe one of your autosaves is something that you don't want in your project, like you made some kind of catastrophic error with your project and you need to go back a version. You can certainly do that, and you can do that up to 20 times with your autosaves. You can turn that number up and you'll have more autosave versions. It won't start overwriting or deleting the older version. If we jump down to media cache here, this is kind of important too, especially if Premiere starts overwhelming your hard drive. If you're working just on your C drive here, and you notice that like there's so much data, you're running out of space. I run into that every once in a while. You can clear the cache, so remove media cache files here. You can click delete and they will get deleted. You can also set the media cache database here. So if you don't want it saved on your C drive, if you want it on an external drive or something like that, you can browse and select the drive that you want all of your media cache to be stored. There's also media cache management down here. So if your cache does build up too large, you can always set this to automatically delete after it reaches a certain threshold. Going one further than that, we see memory here, and we can see what kind of reserved memory it has for a certain program. Right now I have After Effects, Premiere, and Audition pulled up, and it says, hey, you have 16 gigs of RAM. We will devote 13 gigs of RAM to these programs and reserve 3 more gigs of RAM for other programs that you might use. So like I have Chrome up as well, and I only have 3 gigs of RAM to run Chrome. If you do find that your program is crashing because you have memory issues, so a RAM overload, so if you find that the program really slows down and then crashes on you, this might be a place where you can adjust that. So optimize rendering for performance is checked on for me, but you can switch that over to optimize rendering for memory, and maybe your program will work a little bit better. It really is for like memory dumping overload. So if you're exporting and it just won't export out properly, like it crashes every time you export, this might be something that works for you. Also, if you are rendering into out areas and it crashes that way, this might be something that you want to toggle on. I keep it on performance though, because I don't really run into that issue very much. I guess I'm just kind of lucky in that regard. If we head on down to timeline, we can see a couple of extra things here. So video transition default duration. Remember when we were pressing Control D for that quick transition? So that's this. If you want, when you press Control D, for that to last longer generally, you can turn that up to however many seconds you want it to last or however many frames you want it to last. You can also set up this thing here that I think is really interesting, still image default duration. So if you happen to have a project where you were going to do like a photo slideshow and you brought in 150 still images and they all came in at 5 seconds in length, but you wanted them to last 10 seconds in length. You might try all of these different kinds of ways, maybe a subsequence, and slow it down by 50%. But if you wanted to, you could adjust the still image default duration. So as soon as you brought that image in, it's going to be exactly however many seconds you tell it right here. There are also some interesting things, and they're just based on your preferences. If your timeline, if your playhead reaches the edge of your timeline, it's going to move the timeline over. And how does it move the timeline over? Should it move a whole page over? Should it smoothly move over? Or should it not move over at all? Your playhead just goes out of the bounds. You can adjust that right there. Also, if you want to adjust your mouse scrolling in your timeline, what's it going to do? Is it going to expand your video track vertically, or is it going to expand the timeline horizontally? I don't have a mouse connected here, so I can't test that with you, but that is an option too. So let's just try to adjust this timeline playback auto scrolling to smooth scroll and see what happens. So now you have this kind of smooth scrolling through your timeline. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in that preference window that you can kind of customize to be what you prefer, very literally what you prefer. So if you've made these preference changes that you like a lot, and you've made the keyboard shortcut changes that you like, you can save those under your Creative Cloud account. If you go to File, you can go to Sync Settings and then Sync Settings Now. And if I press OK here, it's going to shut down my project and reload it. But all of those preferences and keyboard shortcuts and anything that we like kind of customize for our version of Adobe Premiere will be saved under our account. If we go to a different computer, launch Premiere, and use our Adobe account, we'll notice that our Premiere looks like our Premiere and not like the generic version of Premiere. So that's basically it. That is Adobe Premiere. Pretty much front to back. There are some things that you could dig in deeper with. Audio effects in general, color grading. We did touch on the main aspects of those things, but not a deep dive into those things. If you found one of those things really interesting, maybe dig a little bit deeper online or potentially take a class on those things specifically, and you might have found a niche in the post-production world. I hope this has been helpful for you, and I hope you learned a little bit about the program.